Thank you to PD and Real Mid-Atlantic for inviting me. So today we're going to talk about the very easy topic of student data privacy. I'm sure all of you have had to deal with this topic over the past couple years as it's exploded in the news media and in your classrooms every day as parents ask, what is this data? Why is it being collected? And a lot of the times follow that up with, okay, can I opt out of that? So let's take a poll. How many of you in the past 2 years have had to deal with this issue in your district or school? Let's see, raised hands. Not too many. How many of you think that you know everything you need to know on this topic and you're good? How many of you think you know a fair amount about this topic, but you're still looking for more information? And how many of you are pretty much like, I don't know anything, please give me all the resources possible? All right, we got a few there. So as I said, the topic today is not only student data privacy, but what to train administrators and teachers on for this topic. So this has been a huge issue. There is no state at this point who has figured out what they should be training administrators and teachers on, and the resources are all over the map. So my goals today are to bring forward solutions suggested by a lot of my state education agency contacts, district contacts, school contacts, in order to let you know what are some of the resources that are out there and what are some of the main topics that you want to make sure, above all else, that you know, that your administrators know, that your teachers know. So first of all, why is someone from the National Association of State Boards of Education working on this topic? So really quickly, 37 state boards of education have at least some authority over education data privacy. So I've been trying to work with those boards in passing rules and regulations, serving on SLDS boards. So really, this is why I spend so much of my time on this topic. And we do at NASB state technical assistance work, from state visits, analyzing a state's laws, regulations, and policies to identify best practices and gaps. We work a lot on federal legislation and weighing in on that, and then also just research, analysis, and information sharing through presentations like today, through various publications, some of which I brought with me today. If you want to come get them after my presentation today, I'd love to give you a copy. So this is why this has been buzzed about quite so much and why training is so crucial. 35 states have passed 73 laws on student data privacy since 2013. Let that sink in for another minute. So what's changed that has made this topic rise to the forefront? So we've obviously seen increased collection and the role of data under NCLB and now under ESSA. We've seen an explosion of online tools and schools and districts outsourcing, often for security reasons, to cloud vendors and others, the holding of student data. We've also seen increased potential of data exposure through our mainstream life with the breaches at Target, through the Edward Snowden leaks. So this has really risen to the forefront, the idea of protecting our data and its vulnerability in our new technological age. And of course, we've seen a few cases that have made the news, which has made this a really key topic. Now, it's important to remember, even though 35 states have passed laws, 49 states, including Pennsylvania, have introduced at least one bill since 2013 on this topic, adding up to more than 400 bills. So in 2014, we saw about 110 bills. In 2015, 188. And then finally this year, we've seen 111 bills introduced, with another 73 that were carried over from 2015 being discussed in 38 state legislatures. This issue isn't going away anytime soon. It's important to remember that legislatures aren't the only ones discussing this. We've also seen actions from states, from regulations to guidance to executive orders to resolutions. And training is essential. Anyone who handles data should know how to protect those data. However, provisions for training appear in only a couple of the more than 400 bills introduced in the past couple years. We've seen a lot of examples of why training is so important, mainly in the breaches and the unintended disclosure stories that you've seen all around the country. Human error is a factor in 95% of data security incidents. Often, this human error comes in the form of really simple computer common sense or best practices issues. So attaching the wrong attachment to an email, accidentally making a password-protected website with student personally identifiable information visible to the whole web, not locking a computer at lunchtime. So a lot of these times, a lot of the incidents, a lot of the fear around student data privacy and protecting student data can actually be solved through really basic computer basic skills, which I know so many of you, especially the IT directors in this room, have tried to get across to everyone who you work with. So we've seen a little bit of legislative language on training, as I mentioned. In ESSA, Title II funding can be used to train teachers and administrators on data privacy. It was added as specifically as an allowable use this year. Georgia had a provision saying the chief privacy officer of the state would now have to think about and discuss training both at the state and district level. A new bill awaiting signature by the governor in Colorado this year actually required the SEA to develop model training, examples of training, and other guidance for districts. And then we've also seen some model legislation from the ACLU that specifically mandated that training be included. So what do administrators and teachers need to know? I am going to make you all talk to each other. I want you to imagine, first of all, if you're the only one at your table, you're going to want to get some friends. I want you all to imagine you just found out, it is 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, you just found out that there has been a breach of student information. What do you need to know? What do you need to do? I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to discuss this so you can start thinking about what are some of the key things that you would need to know in training. Okay, let's add one more element to this scenario. You find out that the unintended disclosure occurred because a teacher in your school downloaded an app without checking with anyone and entered student information into it, and the company had a hack. Now what do you do? Go ahead. Okay, we're going to come back now, so tie up your thought. Okay, so what you were probably talking about first was, does your school or district have a policy on this? Do you already know what to do because you already have it written down somewhere? Now, how many of you in this room have a policy that you could refer back to? Raise your hand. Got a few. I'd say a little less than a quarter. So for those of you who don't have a policy, you know what you'll be doing in the next couple weeks, since I've just scared you all. How many of you have a policy that deals with teachers downloading apps or having to go through a district? Okay. Again, a little less than a quarter. And just shout it out, preferably not all over each other. What other things did you discuss? Notifying parents, that discussion. Notifying your boss. Very important. What else? COPA, so bringing in some of the laws, the Children's Online Personal Protection Act, Privacy Protection Act, there we go, and other laws like FERPA, PPRA. What else? Contact. Okay. So, as you can see through this little exercise, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot that, depending on your role, that you will need to know, or you'll need to know who to talk to. So just very briefly, and I would love any thoughts from all of you after this, if you have additional things. At the bare minimum, what do administrators need to know? Not including the teachers right now. So a lot of it can depend on the district or school, depending on where you are, how many supports you have. Does your district provide the resources for your school? Do you only have, 50 kids? Do you, through a whole bunch of factors like that, how many ed tech products you're using, how many vendors you're contracting with, you may need to know more or less. So what everybody needs to know is not the same. However, as I mentioned, one of the key things here is basic internet and computer safety information. One of my scariest stories that I have heard is a principal in an elementary school who went on a vendor's website and commented on a random page on this website asking for personally identifiable information for an elementary school student who you could identify by connecting the dots of where he was principal, what he was discussing about the student, and the vendor replied. And this was on a publicly available web page for probably a couple months before someone noticed this and it was taken down. Other major breaches that we've seen, as I said, were web pages that were accidentally made public or not double checking attachments, which is something that just happened back in December in one school district, and releasing thousands of students' disciplinary and health-related information. So it is absolutely key that there is basic internet and computer safety information everywhere for everyone on all of this. And this doesn't even get into the crazy issues with phishing and all the other emails you've been receiving from your IT administrators. Just remembering some basic things about computer safety and how to avoid disclosing information, double checking before you send an email is really key here. Before we even get into any of the laws. Now, the laws we're dealing with, as was brought up, are the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which protects students under the age of 13. And this law is a little less relevant than the big one, FERPA. But COPPA restricts what companies can show students, so all of the vendors that you work with, if they know they're serving a product to a student under the age of 13, are restricted by this law. And then coming back to FERPA, you all had what I'm sure was a great presentation from PTAC, the Privacy Technical Assistance Center at the U.S. Department of Education the other day, so I won't go too into FERPA. Happy to talk about it after if anyone wants to. But that is the primary law, and as administrators, you will need to know at least the basics of what you're required to do under FERPA. Also important to know is the dangers of an unintentional student data disclosure, the least of which is the horrendous news stories that will come to your door every single day. But what can be done with this information? When is an accidental breach that involves student names, is that worse than a breach disclosing disciplinary information? Absolutely. All breaches are not the same. And then also contract and app issues. So dealing with vendors, how to do that, what is your policy? So this is a very bare bones outline, but I found it really useful. Missouri did an audit recently of a district using sort of these criteria. Data governance, is there a policy? Is there security controls? How are user accounts monitored? What is the incident response and continuity planning? So that breach issue that we just discussed. Is there a security awareness program? And then how are vendors monitored? And this is sort of a good high-level checklist to look at for all of this. I should say, by the way, I scheduled some tweets during all of this, so, and I'll also have a URL at the end. All of my slides, all of the links that I'm discussing are on that webpage. So let's talk about some resources. For those who really love MOOCs, there's a great data privacy MOOC put together by the Foundation for Excellence in Education that pulled together a ton of experts. And you can take that and learn a lot of the basics about student privacy. However, you should know it's not aimed at teachers and administrators specifically. It is aimed at anyone who wants to know about this topic. Privacy Technical Assistance Center, can't talk about them enough because they have so many great resources. For example, they have a checklist for creating a data use policy. They have a checklist for creating your district's privacy program, so creating that policy that about a quarter of you had. And then they also have a lot of YouTube videos that you can use to learn yourself or to teach your teachers about student directory information, how to communicate, or creating a privacy program. Another great resource is FERPA Sherpa from the Future Privacy Forum. It has really great resources and basic information, including most recently, which I'll show again later, an Educator's Guide to Student Privacy, which was just released on Monday. The Consortium on School Networking has a lot of great resources that were recommended to me by a lot of district and state leaders who do training. And I'm particularly in love with their privacy toolkit, which has a very simple bunch of lists that you can use that says, what questions should you be asking your vendors? What are the things you can do now in your district to secure privacy, and a whole bunch of other things like that, which are very useful. They also have training, though unfortunately it's not free, and they have this most recently a trusted learning environment seal they've put together. I think they still have 27 free spots open for any districts who feel that they're doing a really good job and want that recognized, which essentially is a seal which says our district is doing a really good job. We have gone through this criteria. So they're a great resource for anyone looking to both show that they're doing a great job and to learn more about how to do a great job in protecting student privacy. So we put out a publication about a month and a half ago, discussing sort of the lessons learned over the past 2.5 years of working on student data privacy. And I sort of adapted some of these lessons for you. We have the full publication up here if you'd like it later. But really the key ones that I framed a lot of this discussion through, because training runs through all of these, are these 6 principles. So first is stating the value proposition for data. Why are you using it? Why is it important? And I know many of you have had to have this conversation with people in your districts, with others. So it's really key here to note that if LEAs and SEAs do not take the lead in being transparent, legislatures have stepped in to require transparency, often in ways that can be very burdensome and not particularly useful to parents who are seeking transparency. For example, we have a law that was just passed in Connecticut that if you read it on its face, I'm a lawyer, by the way, I'm very sorry. If you read it on its face, it says that within 5 days of signing a new contract, parents must be electronically notified each and every time. And I think they're going to interpret that to say we can post it on a website, but it could certainly be interpreted to say we must email out to parents every single time we sign a new contract, which, as those of you who deal with contracts in your districts knows, that could mean hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of notifications. And at a minimum, what we've seen is a requirement that things be put on websites, often within a very short time limit, likely requiring probably half of the time of a staff member in your district or school. So by adopting transparency up front, sometimes these types of transparency requirements can be avoided. It's also really important to know about the state and district-led initiatives regarding transparency and information sharing. I'll discuss this a little more later, but there's some really fantastic websites that you can model on, that you can sort of statewide initiatives that you can use in order to provide transparency to your parents without having to put in a lot of the work upfront yourself because others have already done it. And then it's also really important to pay attention to directory information, which, as many of you know, is the one area of student data privacy that parents can opt out of, allowing schools and districts and the state to disclose that information. We've heard that there's a report coming out soon that's going to likely shine a deeper light on maybe inappropriate disclosures of directory information. So it's a very good time for all of you to double check your policies and transparency around that. So without transparency, this is what you get. These are some of the headlines we saw over the past couple years from major publications, from major education resources, discussing how student data collection is out of control, worries rise, look who's data mining your toddlers. Schools are looking at every little aspect of data and using it to put your child in a box. So it's really important to remember that when you're not speaking, there's still a lot of voices out there who will make your life much more difficult. So there are various ways to communicate. One of the greatest new resources that I've seen has come out of the Foundation for Excellence in Education. They just put out a new communications toolkit that includes things like sample key messages, web page content, frequently asked questions you can use, how to send a letter to parents, talking points, an article or newsletter, lawmaker brief, opinion pieces, social media posts, all sorts of great ways to communicate and provide transparency. And this can and should be simple. You're dealing with people who, just like you, have a limited amount of time in their day, and they want to know that their child's information is secure. And this is a great website out of Chesterfield County in Virginia, which just has, here are the apps that we use, here are our privacy policies and guidelines, here are our frequently asked questions, and here's a Google form where you can ask a question, it gets sent to the person in charge, and we'll get back to you. So this can be very, very simple and easy. And there are a lot of leading districts who have done a lot of the work here, and you can feel free to steal from them outright most of the time, double check this. So Fairfax County in Virginia has done a lot of work here. Their CTO is one of my favorite people, and he's constantly updating things, so this is a great district to check out. Ventura County out in California has a e-safety committee task force, which is developing a lot of key resources, infographics. Their website is fantastic to check out to give you ideas of what to do in your district. Houston ISD down in Texas has some wonderful resources as well. And then Wisconsin, which is my favorite state in the world right now, has the best webpage I have ever seen. And if you don't have a webpage yet, just send everybody to Wisconsin's for now, because they have a lot of great resources, and it's really easy to understand everything and to move around their website. As you consider training, it's also important to remember that you're not remaking the wheel here. 35 states have introduced one of only 2 models of the laws we've seen, and almost every law that has been passed around the country is based on one of those 2 models. The bills that are currently pending in Congress are mostly based around these 2 models. So one is a governance-focused model out of Oklahoma, passed in 2013, the Student Data Act, which regulates schools, districts, and the SEA, and the other is California's SOPIPA, which regulates vendors. So if you as an administrator are familiar with these 2 laws, you're already far ahead of the game if you plan your training around these 2 models. So a key thing that we've seen is this fear around limiting vendor use of data, and as I said earlier, that's a lot of times not the major concern. That's not the real danger. The real danger tends to be that human error aspect of all of this. But it's still important to reassure people that, a third party isn't taking this information and going out and selling it. So we've seen a lot of policies, laws passed that reiterate FERPA's provisions that say companies cannot advertise to students. Companies cannot sell student data, and have gone beyond that to say companies can't even create profiles. They can't do targeted advertising. So we've seen a lot of limiting of data use that's held by third parties in laws for non-educational purposes, and a lot of contract provisions that you can all steal as you're adopting things for your district that limit what companies can do in terms of data use and storage. So the 2 big sort of laws here that people can look at are, again, California's SOPIPA and Georgia's law that was passed last year, which is based off of SOPIPA but a little more expansive. Other factors to consider when you're dealing with vendors is Clickwrap agreements. So those things where you just click yes. So figuring out whether or not you want your district or school to have a policy about all of these things. Defining who can sign contracts. Can teachers sign up for apps on their own? It's been a mixed bag in terms of what states and districts have done. Are you including provisions to allow for subcontractors? A lot of times when you're dealing with companies, they have contractors below them that provide part of their service. So making sure that that's incorporated in whatever policies or contract addendums you have. Requiring certain training on the vendor's side. It's not just your staff that has to be trained, but also theirs. Balancing out, if you have very restrictive provisions in your state, then you may be shutting out the great startup that was created by 3 teachers from your local elementary school who created this reading app that's really based on their educational experience. So figuring out how stringent do we need this to be? Are they only collecting student usernames, which can count as personally identifiable information, or are they collecting much more stringent things and adapting your security requirements and what you require based on the level of security needed to protect that information? And that goes to the final point there, which is having a standard set of contract requirements for your district might backfire. We've seen more and more pushback from vendors and third parties who are saying, I don't collect student disciplinary information, and I feel uncomfortable signing a contract implying that I do. So keeping that in mind as well as you make these decisions. So we've seen a lot of resources to help schools and districts navigate this world of contracts. So we've seen most recently a new badge from Clever that would let K-12 students just log on and use that instead of a password. We've seen badges from various companies like I Keep Safe, or a nonprofit I should say, Imply LLC, which identify if an app is complying with federal or a state law. And then we've also seen the student privacy pledge, enforceable by the FTC, that is voluntary. And while this pledge is not enough to see which vendors are protecting privacy, a lot of experts have recommended it as a good starting place for districts and schools looking to see what companies are at least thinking about privacy, and then they're able to dig down into those 200 companies to decide who they want to use or put on the approved list. So again, I want to provide some resources in this area for the administrators that you're training or for yourselves as you make these decisions. So PTAC has an amazing chart that has model terms of service. So when you're going through a company's privacy policy, it says, look out for this, make sure it has this, and it's absolutely fantastic. So I cannot recommend this resource enough. This is the initiative that I had mentioned earlier in terms of both transparency and being useful. The Student Data Privacy Consortium was started by a fantastic guy in Massachusetts, Steve Smith, out of Cambridge Public Schools. And it was an effort by him to bring districts together to publicize to parents what apps the school was using, what data was collected, and having sort of a fairly universal addendum that all companies would sign on to so they could post those contracts then on the website. So they've done a lot of the work for you. Even if you're not interested in joining the consortium, which does cost money, you can go on their website at any time and go through the list of vendors that they're using and see what elements, what personally identifiable information those vendors collect, see what the contracts are that they signed with either Massachusetts or the other states that have this, Maine, Wisconsin, and Virginia, and share this information among yourselves or with parents who have questions as you negotiate with vendors as well. So again, this is sort of, this is one of the pages on that website showing for this particular company, it shows which school districts are using this product, the contract, and what data that the company collects is coming soon. And it also has a copy of the addendum they use for all vendors on there, which you can, again, freely use yourself. So I want to also bring in, we've seen a huge issue with unintended consequences where states, districts, and schools in an effort to protect student privacy have gone too far, pushed beyond what was necessary to protect privacy, and it's backfired. So we've seen issues with Louisiana where districts were afraid they couldn't do yearbooks, school pictures, or announce football players' names, let alone suggest kids for state scholarships. So there was a lot of issues there that no state wants to get into. And we've seen other issues with research being conducted, with being able to release 56% of graduation rates in Oklahoma, with restricting the ability of teachers to get certifications in New Hampshire. And a lot of times this has resulted from, again, sort of fear-based policies, from not being very careful in definitions, requiring that, for example, parents can go directly to vendors to get their child's information, which requires that vendors suddenly have very personal information about who is the parent, what is the custody arrangement, et cetera, instead of going through the school as a conduit. And then also a lot of these consequences have occurred because everyone hasn't been in the same room. So sometimes legislatures by themselves or the state as a whole have written laws that when districts weighed in, when vendors weighed in, had very obvious burdens or issues that resulted in consequences. So this is really important as you're developing a policy for your district as well to remember. So moving on from administrators and creating district and school policies, what do teachers need to know? So again, the basic internet and computer safety procedures are key here because that is the #1 cause of all of the breaches that we've seen. And then also the dangers, again, of unintentional student data disclosure, how to use apps safely. So not just, going out and adopting this cool new app that could help kids learn, but really thinking critically about what apps are safe, whether that's teaching teachers to know what provisions not to use an app for. So again, looking at those model terms of service, what to look for in the privacy policy that's bad, what's positive, or just saying, teachers, you can't download apps. You have to go through our main IT office, and this is why. And then finally, how to talk to parents. This is so key, again, this transparency aspect. Parents trust the teachers, and they're the ones that they're going to go to when there's a student data question. And making sure that teachers know where there are resources is absolutely key. And I don't have a slide on it here, but I do have the link that people can look at. Data Quality Campaign, if you don't know about them, has incredible resources, videos, one-pagers, two-pagers, that provide information for parents, for teachers, for others, that is easy to understand, oftentimes very visual, so teachers and parents know what is happening with data, why it is useful, and how it is protected. So for what teachers need to know, I'm going to again give a shout out to Wisconsin, which has a fantastic training web page that you can all use or direct your teachers to. And they also have an amazing privacy training module, which takes probably 20 minutes to complete and includes a lot of those really basic computer safety, what is PII, what are the basic things you as a teacher need to know about FERPA. Highly recommend. And again, you don't have to recreate the wheel here. You can freely use a lot of these great resources that other people have developed. So again, this is the training module there. In this, you would click on the picture to learn how to protect student personal information in your office, on electronic devices, and on these different scenarios. I had a lot of states and districts recommend this video, Ask Before You App, so getting at this issue of teachers downloading an app without thinking about the privacy consequences that could result. I mentioned earlier the new Educator's Guide to Student Privacy, which was developed with the help of a fantastic teacher, Carrie Gallagher, who just developed a really easy to understand, short little resource that was just put out on Monday that you can provide to your teachers. Also very new, iKeepSafe just released free privacy courses for K-12 teachers and administrators, which includes a lot of videos, a lot of one-pagers, two-pagers, that you can also freely steal from as you train your teachers and administrators. And then a lot of people have suggested that this is a great place where teachers can learn through teaching. So we've also seen some really great privacy curriculum resources that are available for teachers teaching anything from kindergarten through high school. So the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard has this amazing curriculum, and also a digital literacy resource platform, which has a lot of resources. As many of you know, if you receive E-rate funds, you have to provide digital literacy training anyways, so why not spend some privacy into that? Fordham University Center for Law and Information Policy also has a privacy educators program with freely available resources. So all of these resources are out there, they're available to you. Again, I'll give you the link at the end, but I also tweeted it out. So what's next? What else do you need to, as administrators, as leaders in your schools and districts, what do you need to look out for? So we've seen a trend recently of a focus from legislatures on surveillance and one-to-one devices. So the requirement that you monitor or filter internet access or one-to-one devices under federal law has been looked at really closely, particularly by the ACLU, and I think we're going to see more legislation throughout the country dealing with this issue and protecting student privacy while also protecting students. We also have pending legislation in Pennsylvania introduced in 2015. It seems unlikely that it's going to go anywhere this year, but PDE would know much better than me. So I would check with them on that to see whether you should familiarize yourself with that and read through it to see if there are any of those accidental consequences I mentioned or things that would work better for your district or school. And again, we're only one news story away, one breach away from this becoming something that is all that's discussed in your local PTA meeting or in your local school board meeting. So it's really key that you put proactive policies in place, that you train people in order to avoid those unintended disclosures from occurring. So in addition to the resources I mentioned, NASB has a lot of data privacy resources. The recent publication I mentioned, we just put out our magazine about data in general and use, which has a lot of the experts who have been working on this topic. I brought some copies with me. Also, we have a comparison chart of federal bills that you can take a look at. And we have a webinar tomorrow on the 2016 legislative session in student privacy if any of you are interested in joining, and that is the URL to RSVP for that, free, happy to have you there. We also have a state policy database coming out with all state laws and regulations that will be free, online, searchable, so you can see what laws already exist in your state. We are doing some training boot camps with other organizations, policy audits, and putting together a publication on surveillance. And I want to end this by asking, what other resources do you need? And have you told PDE about them? What else do you need to see? I would love a lot if any of you who could think of resources would email me and let me know, because I'm working with a lot of these organizations that I mentioned as resources in these slides and others who are looking to see what they can do for districts or schools for free in order to move student privacy forward, in order to help all of you protect student privacy. So please keep that in mind and let us know, because there might be a resource out there that comes out next week. This field is moving so quickly. Or it may be something that could be easily developed based on existing resources. So please let me know and let others in your state know what you need. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the time today. I think we have just a few minutes for questions, if anyone has any, or if you have a very specific issue that you'd like to come talk to me after this, I'm happy to do that. And thank you again to all of you for listening today, and I hope this was useful.